Welcome back to Smile and Scars, where calm exposes arrogance, and silence reveals the truth faster than shouting ever could. This is a story about authority, fear, and a single minute that changed everything. The industrial complex sat at the edge of the city, quiet and unremarkable from the outside. High fences, cameras that blinked softly, and a security gate that opened only when it was told to. To most people, it was just another government facility. To those who worked there, it was a place where mistakes were not tolerated. Steven Seagal stepped out of the black sedan and adjusted his coat. He hadn't announced his arrival. He never did. Years of experience had taught him that the best way to understand a system was to observe it without warning. He walked toward the entrance at an unhurried pace, posture relaxed, eyes alert. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint hum of generators and distant radio chatter. Everything felt controlled, too controlled. At the gate, a young security officer glanced up from his screen. "Sir, you need to stop right there." The officer said, voice firm. Steven stopped. "Good morning," he replied calmly. "Identification," the officer demanded. Steven reached into his coat slowly and handed over a simple ID card. The officer scanned it, frowned, then scanned it again. "This doesn't come up in the system," the officer said, suspicion creeping into his tone. "It shouldn't," Steven replied. That answer triggered something. The officer straightened. "Sir, step back from the gate." Steven did exactly that. Behind the gate, movement picked up, radios crackled. Doors opened. Within seconds, the calm atmosphere shifted. Footsteps echoed. Voices sharpened. A SWAT team emerged from the side entrance. Black gear stark against the gray concrete. Helmets, vests, weapons held at the ready. Their leader, a broad-shouldered officer with a rigid jaw, stepped forward. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. Steven raised his hands slowly, palms open. "There's no need for this," he said evenly. "You don't get to decide that," the SWAT officer snapped. "You're attempting to access a restricted facility." "I'm authorized," Steven replied. The SWAT officer laughed once, short and sharp. "Everyone says that." The team spread out, forming a semicircle. Their movements were efficient, rehearsed, but tense. This wasn't a drill, this was adrenaline. Steven noticed the details immediately. The officer's grip was too tight, his stance too aggressive, fear masquerading as control. "I'm requesting you lower your weapon," Steven said calmly. That was the wrong sentence. The SWAT officer's eyes hardened. "You don't give orders here." Without another word, he raised the taser. "Wait," the gate officer started. Too late, the taser fired. The crackling sound cut through the air as the probe struck Steven's chest. Electricity surged. Gasps erupted from nearby personnel. Steven's body tensed, muscles locking as the current coursed through him. For a brief moment he staggered, but he didn't fall. The SWAT officer stared, stunned. "Stay down," he shouted, firing again. Steven dropped to one knee, breathing controlled, eyes focused despite the pain. He didn't scream, he didn't curse. He waited. The taser cycle ended. Silence followed. "You see that?" One officer muttered. He didn't even go down. The SWAT leader stepped closer, weapon still trained on Steven. "You're resisting," he said. Steven looked up slowly. "You just made a mistake." The officer scoffed. "You're in no position to threaten." A voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down." Everyone froze. A senior colonel emerged from the building, his uniform immaculate, his expression unreadable. He took in the scene in seconds, the taser wires, the kneeling man, the tense SWAT team. "What is going on here?" the colonel demanded. "Sir," the SWAT officer said quickly, "this individual attempted unauthorized access. He refused to comply." The colonel's eyes settled on Steven's face. His posture changed instantly. "Remove the tasers," the colonel said sharply. "Sir," the SWAT officer asked, confused. "Now," the colonel repeated. The wires were removed hastily. Steven stood slowly, adjusting his coat as if nothing had happened. His calm unsettled everyone watching. The colonel approached Steven and lowered his voice. "You weren't supposed to arrive unannounced." Steven nodded. "I needed to see the response." The colonel exhaled slowly. "And you got it." He turned to the SWAT officer, his voice cold. "Do you have any idea who this is?" The officer hesitated. "No, sir." The colonel's jaw tightened. This is Steven Seagal. He is here under direct authority. The SWAT officer's face drained of color. I didn't know. He stammered. That much is obvious. The colonel replied. Step back. Steven raised a hand slightly. It's fine, he said calmly. The colonel looked at him. It's not. Before anyone could speak again, the sound of engines grew louder. Vehicles approached rapidly. The atmosphere shifted once more, but this time it wasn't fear that filled the air. It was anticipation. A motorcade pulled up outside the gate. Flags fluttered briefly in the breeze as doors opened in perfect synchronization. A man stepped out whose presence alone silenced the entire area. 4 stars gleamed on his uniform. Every officer snapped to attention. The SWAT officer swallowed hard. The general's gaze swept across the scene, then locked onto Steven. He walked forward without haste. Steven, the general said calmly. General. Steven replied, nodding once. The general turned slowly to the assembled officers, his expression unreadable. Explain, he said. No one spoke. The SWAT officer's world narrowed to the sound of his own heartbeat, because in that single minute, from the taser firing to the general's arrival, everything had changed, and the consequences were only just beginning. The air in the compound felt heavier now. The shock from the taser had faded from Steven Seagal's body, but it lingered in the minds of everyone around him. Every officer, every security guard, every SWAT team member stood rigid, unsure where authority ended and consequences began. The general's presence changed everything. Even the youngest recruit could sense it. This was not just a man in uniform. This was a 4-star general who commanded respect by the weight of his own experience, not by threats. The general took a slow, deliberate step closer to Steven. His eyes narrowed, taking in the details. The wires from the taser dangling, the sweat on the SWAT officer's brow, the tension in the air. Steven remained calm, hands folded lightly in front of him, the picture of collected poise. The contrast was undeniable. One man had panicked, the other had mastered restraint. I want a full report, the general said without raising his voice. From the moment he arrived to the taser deployment, every word, every action, the SWAT officer opened his mouth, stammering. Sir, I thought he was attempting unauthorized access. The general cut him off with a single gesture. Do you have authorization to taser someone without confirmation? No, sir. The officer admitted, his voice small. I acted too quickly. The general's eyes bored into him. Too quickly. A man fell to his knees because of your impulsiveness. Do you understand the severity of that action? Yes, sir. The officer said, his usual arrogance completely stripped away. Steven finally spoke, his calm voice cutting through the tension. It was not about severity. It was about awareness. A second of thought would have prevented all of this. The general nodded subtly at Steven, a sign of silent approval. Then he turned to the group assembled behind the SWAT officer, many of whom had been standing frozen the entire time. This is what happens when discipline is absent. The general said, training, authority, power. They must coexist. One without the others leads to chaos. The SWAT officer swallowed hard. He had been in tactical units for years, but never had anyone spoken to him like this. Not about competence, not about respect. He realized now that all his years of technical skill were meaningless without control of his own reactions. The general motioned for Steven to follow him. They moved aside, leaving the remaining officers unsure whether to breathe. Even the gate security personnel, who had been caught up in the chaos, seemed to shrink under the weight of the conversation. Steven, the general said quietly once they were alone, I want your assessment of the compound's security protocols. Your first impression. Steven glanced around briefly, then returned his gaze to the general. Procedures exist, but they are followed rigidly without context. The men respond to protocol, not judgment. That's why the incident occurred. The general nodded slowly. I noticed. Impulsiveness masquerading as authority. Fear masquerading as power. How should we address it? Steven exhaled slowly. Training, not just physical, mental, situational awareness, restraint. Every officer must understand the consequences of rushing to force and the value of pause. The general's eyes lit with interest. And were you concerned at any point? Steven shook his head. Only for them, not for myself. Chaos often reveals the truth in those unprepared for it. The general allowed a small smile. Good. That is why you're here. Meanwhile, the SWAT officer was left behind, knees still slightly trembling, heart racing. He watched the two men speaking quietly, their calm presence filling the space with authority he had never felt before. For the first time, he realized how quickly his arrogance had been dismantled. One mistake, one impulsive act, and everything he thought defined his power was gone. His uniform had protected him until now, but it could not protect him from awareness. The general's words echoed in his mind. Training without understanding is dangerous. Authority without control is destructive. He repeated them over and over, like a mantra to be remembered. Back with Steven, the general asked him to walk through the exact sequence of events. Steven recounted everything meticulously: the arrival, the gate encounter, the initial verbal challenge, the movement of the officers, and the taser deployment. Every hesitation, every misstep, every detail was noted. It was not an accusation, it was an analysis. The general listened intently, asking precise questions that probed deeper than any security protocol ever could. After the discussion, the general turned to Steven. I want you to conduct a training session, not a lecture, a demonstration of what restraint looks like. I want every officer who interacted today to witness it. They need to see calm before force, judgment before impulse. Steven raised an eyebrow. A demonstration? The general's expression was firm. Yes, 1 minute can make the difference between control and catastrophe. Let them feel that minute. Steven didn't argue. He knew this was why he had been brought in. 1 minute? That's all it took to teach a lesson that would be remembered for years. Orders went out quietly, and soon, every officer involved in the incident gathered in a large training hall. The SWAT officer stood stiffly at the back, avoiding eye contact, still haunted by the replay of his own actions. Steven entered calmly, eyes scanning the room, assessing balance, body language, micro-expressions. He did not raise his voice, did not gesture excessively, did not demand attention. Yet he had it. Every head turned, every breath stilled, every ego humbled by his presence alone. Steven began with a simple demonstration. He walked into the center of the room, moving with slow, deliberate precision. He showed how posture could communicate authority without aggression, how calm breathing could neutralize tension, and how awareness of surroundings could prevent conflict before it started. The officers watched, transfixed, realizing that every move they had made that day had been reactive, impulsive, uncontrolled. Then he demonstrated the taser scenario, but this time in reverse. An officer was instructed to aim a taser at him as he approached, and Steven responded with complete control. He shifted, redirected the officer's momentum, and disarmed the threat. Not with anger, not with aggression, but with awareness. The room gasped. No one had moved faster than the officer, yet no one had been harmed. Every motion was deliberate, every pause calculated. The SWAT officer who had fired first stared, his mind racing. He had assumed that speed and reaction defined skill. Now he saw clearly. Patience and awareness defined mastery. He realized that what he thought was strength had been weakness all along. The lesson was searing, humbling, unforgettable. After the demonstration, Steven addressed the room. 1 minute of thought can prevent years of regret. Authority is meaningless without understanding. Power is destructive without restraint. Remember that, and you'll survive situations you never imagined. The general nodded in agreement, standing silently at the back. He understood that Steven's words were more than instruction. They were a challenge, a test, a mirror for every officer to see themselves clearly. No discipline manual could convey the weight of those lessons, only experience, and now observation could. The officers were dismissed for the day, but the impact lingered. No one spoke as they filed out. Each was left to reflect, replaying moments in their minds, comparing impulsive action to deliberate control, recognizing the difference between fear masquerading as authority and true strength. The SWAT officer who had tasered Steven lingered behind, finally approaching the general. "Sir, I understand now," he said quietly, voice trembling. I acted recklessly." The general nodded. "Yes, and now you have a choice. Repeat the mistake or learn from it." "I want to learn," the officer whispered. "I don't want to feel that fear again." "You won't," the general said firmly. "Not if you follow what you just witnessed." As night fell, the industrial complex returned to its usual quiet, but the lessons of the day had permanently altered the atmosphere. Fear had been replaced by awareness, arrogance had been tempered by humility, authority had been redirected by experience, and somewhere in the distance, Steven Seagal walked back to his car, calm as always. He knew the impact would extend beyond the walls of the compound. 1 minute had revealed truth. One presence had commanded respect. One lesson had reshaped behavior that could have spiraled into chaos. The SWAT officer stayed behind for a moment, staring after Steven, understanding finally what true control looked like. His fear had shifted from Steven to himself. The realization was sobering, and yet, within that sobering truth, a chance for redemption had emerged. Because in the end, authority isn't proven by force, it's proven by wisdom, awareness, and restraint, and those who learn that lesson, even in fear, carry it for life. The night had settled over the industrial complex, casting long shadows across the asphalt and fences. The chaos of the earlier encounter had faded, replaced by a quiet tension. Officers reviewed their actions in their minds, while the general and Steven Seagal stood apart, discussing the next steps in low voices. The lessons of 1 minute had stretched far beyond what anyone could have predicted, and yet the most profound moment was yet to arrive. The SWAT officer who had fired the taser remained in the hall, staring at the floor. His hands were still shaking slightly, the adrenaline refusing to leave his system. He had trained for years, but no amount of physical drills could have prepared him for the weight of accountability. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be responsible for someone else's safety and life. Steven Seagal had not attacked him, had not raised a hand, yet the officer felt utterly defeated. And in that defeat, a spark of clarity ignited. The general approached him quietly. "You're aware that one rash decision could have cost us everything today," he said. His voice was calm, but edged with steel. "Do you understand what that means?" The officer swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, I do." "Good. Then the question now is what you're going to do about it." The general continued. "Learning isn't passive. You must act. You must correct." The SWAT officer nodded. "I will, sir. I want to make it right." The general's gaze softened slightly, and he gestured towards Steven. "Then listen carefully to the man who just showed you what control really is." Steven stepped forward, his presence commanding attention without a word. He didn't need to raise his voice. The room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. "Authority isn't something you enforce through fear," he said calmly. "It isn't measured by how quickly you react or how much power you wield over someone else. Authority begins with awareness, with understanding, with the recognition that every action has a consequence." The officer shivered at the truth of those words. For weeks, he had thought that efficiency, speed, and aggression defined a strong officer. Now he realized that restraint, observation, and discipline were the real measures of power, and he had failed. Today, Steven continued, "You were given a chance to act. You chose force without thought. That is not weakness. It is ignorance. Ignorance can be corrected, but only if humility arrives first." The officer bowed his head, feeling the weight of both humiliation and opportunity. For the first time in his career, he truly wanted to earn respect, not demand it. The general stepped closer to Steven. "I want you to oversee a series of exercises for all personnel who were involved in today's incident. Show them the difference between reaction and control." Steven nodded. "They need to experience it, not just hear it." Over the next several hours, Steven guided the officers through controlled scenarios. Each one simulated high-stress situations, from aggressive intruders to verbal confrontations. The officers approached each exercise with caution at first, wary of making another mistake. Steven demonstrated movements, timing, and positioning, not as an attack, but as an example of precision, anticipation, and restraint. His eyes were calm but piercing, observing every expression, every subtle imbalance, every hesitation. The SWAT officer who had fired the taser approached one scenario reluctantly. A role player advanced aggressively, yelling insults and threats. Instinctively, the officer tensed, reaching for his taser. Steven's calm voice cut through. Breathe, assess, control yourself first. The officer froze, remembering the previous incident. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself, and instead of escalating, he redirected the role player's momentum, neutralizing the threat without a single shot fired. Gasps filled the room. He had moved faster, yet no one had been harmed. His hands were steady, his mind clear. The general watched silently, approving, recognizing the transformation occurring before him. Steven's method wasn't just teaching physical control. It was shaping the mind, revealing weaknesses, and reinforcing the power of patience. By the end of the exercises, each officer had experienced a personal reckoning. They realized that their authority depended not on fear or aggression, but on calm judgment and measured response. The SWAT officer who had fired first approached Steven privately. "Sir," he said quietly, "I understand now. I acted recklessly. I almost caused irreparable harm." Steven looked at him steadily. "Awareness comes first. Control comes second. You have begun both." Tears threatened the officer's eyes. I want to make it right, to show that I've learned." "You will," Steven said. "Actions speak louder than words. Continue practicing. Continue observing. Do not let pride or fear dictate your responses again." The officer nodded, a weight lifted from his shoulders. He had been humbled, educated, and transformed, not by punishment, but by demonstration. The general then addressed the entire group. "Today, you learned a lesson that cannot be taught in books or drills. Authority without control is dangerous. Strength without awareness is destructive. Remember what you saw here. Let it guide every decision from this moment forward." The officers stood silently, absorbing the gravity of his words. Every one of them had witnessed what one man, composed and disciplined, could do to reshape behavior and perception in a single minute. They understood now that their own actions were not just about compliance, but about judgment, foresight, and responsibility. As the session concluded, Steven walked outside. The cool evening air was a relief after the intensity of the training. He paused, looking at the city skyline in the distance, reflecting on the events of the day. 1 minute had revealed truth. One demonstration had reshaped behavior. One lesson had changed lives. The SWAT officer who had caused the incident approached the gate quietly. "Sir," he said, voice steady now, "thank you for showing me what real control looks like." Steven nodded once. "You didn't earn it in a moment. You earned it by deciding to learn." The officer smiled faintly, understanding that this was only the beginning. He turned and walked away, ready to face his responsibilities with a new perspective. The general, standing nearby, watched Steven with a mixture of respect and understanding. "You've done more than I expected," he said. 1 minute changed everything. Steven's gaze was calm, unyielding. Time doesn't teach, awareness does. The officers returned to their duties in the following weeks with a renewed sense of purpose. Each confrontation, each decision, was approached with patience and mindfulness. Incidents of unnecessary force dropped dramatically. The SWAT team had become more cohesive, more disciplined, more aware of the consequences of their actions. The man who had once fired the taser became a quiet leader, respected not for his authority, but for his restraint and judgment. He no longer sought to assert dominance through fear. He sought understanding, training, and the betterment of those under his command. Months later, Steven returned to the facility one last time. The general met him at the entrance. "The impact of your visit continues to resonate," the general said. "You've changed the culture here." Steven nodded. "I didn't change anyone. I only provided perspective. They chose to act." The general smiled faintly, a rare combination. Most never recognize it. Stephen gave a final glance at the compound, the officers at work, the city beyond. Authority without awareness is a disaster waiting to happen. Today, 1 minute saved countless consequences. He walked to his car, calm and composed. The SWAT officer from before approached, nodding in respect without a word. Stephen returned the gesture, acknowledging not obedience but understanding. No words were necessary. The lesson had been learned. The industrial complex remained the same from the outside, but inside everything had changed. Officers walked with a new sense of purpose. Authority was tempered with judgment. Fear had been replaced with awareness. Arrogance had been replaced with humility. And the SWAT officer who had fired the taser carried a scar, not visible on the skin, but etched into memory, a reminder that rash actions have lasting consequences. As Stephen drove away, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. He did not seek recognition. He did not crave headlines. His work was in the transformation of minds, the recalibration of authority, the teaching of restraint. And 1 minute, just 1 minute, had been enough to change everything. Because strength is not in aggression, power is not in fear, and authority is meaningless without control. And those who remember this truth carry it for a lifetime.